Welcome to Balkans Debrief. I am Ilva Tare, a non-resident senior fellow with the Europe Center. In the recent first round of presidential elections held on April 24th, the candidate from opposition, Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova, secured a landslide victory, surpassing incumbent candidate Penderovski from SDSM by over 180,000 votes in North Macedonia. Notably, this marks the center-left's party first time receiving fewer than 200,000 votes in history. As North Macedonia gears up for the runoff on May 8th, citizens are also bracing for a pivotal parliamentary election that will significantly impact the nation's EU future. Frustrated and tired by the lack of clear accession path, post-2019 name change, and ongoing dispute with Bulgaria over constitutional changes, voters seek meaningful change. But why are these elections important? I'm joined by Aleksej Demjanski, a political analyst and editor of the MacedonianMatters newsletter. Aleksej, welcome to Balkans Debrief.
Thank you for having me.
What does Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova, a commanding victory in the first round of the presidential election, indicate about voters' desire for change, in your view?
Yeah, polls really had Ms. Siljanovska-Davkova somewhere between 35 and 40%, and she really outperformed. She beat Penderovski, the incumbent president from the Social Democrats, by almost 183,000 votes, and that's more than the number of votes that he himself even received. And so a lot of analysts have been seeing that she really outperformed him in urban areas. She outperformed him in, VMRO-DPMNE's strong bases in rural communities. She even outperformed him in what is known as an SDSM stronghold, the city of Strumica, where former Prime Minister Zoran Zaev is from. And so, as you mentioned, this is the worst result of a SDSM presidential candidate since independence. Again, they were unable to break that 200,000 range of voters. This is clearly a signal that citizens are really unsatisfied with Penderovski. They're unsatisfied with the party. And considering that over the past few months, he polled better than the Social Democrats as a party had been polling, it does not bode very well for him or the Social Democrats heading into the second round and the parliamentary elections.
So, Aleksej, can we say that this represents these votes like a departure from the status quo, and also the voter turnout in this election exceeded 49%, which is higher 8% compared to 2019 presidential election. What factors might explain this increased civic engagement, in your view?
Yeah, what's definitely happened is that a lot of experts and analysts in the lead up to the election were really concerned about low voter turnout. People were really concerned that given that a lot of voters were apathetic, they were becoming disinterested with politics, people were concerned that folks just wouldn't turn out to vote, and that might threaten the second round 40% presidential threshold turnout that's necessary. Those experts and those analysts, myself included, were clearly proved wrong because voters actually did come out with an almost 50% turnout, as you noted. I think that the main thing that's happening here is that there were really a variety of political choices for citizens that really enticed a lot of people to come out. It wasn't just the main two candidates that were in the race. There were 7 candidates that were offering folks someone to vote for rather than just someone to vote against. I think additionally, the sort of ongoing battle between the Albanian parties, the ruling DUI, but also the opposition coalition VLEN, I think that was a really heated fight that got a lot of voters to come out. But also both the DUI and VMRO-DPMNE have been kind of locked in this animosity, this battle lately, and I think they both ramped up a lot of their more nationalist rhetoric, which unfortunately in this case also resulted in a lot of voters wanting to come out and give a say in who should be kind of elected. I think yes.
No, since you mentioned the nationalist vote, I saw in the local media and the media in the West that covered the elections, they portrayed Ms. Siljanovska-Davkova as a nationalist candidate. What does that mean for her views? What were the main themes she campaigned on?
Yeah, essentially, a lot of the campaigns from the candidates that are more from the center-right, so Siljanovska-Davkova from VMRO-DPMNE, Maksim Dimitrievski from the Znam movement, and Biljana Vankovska-Cvjetkovska from the Levica party, what was a common thread in a lot of their campaigns was calling for a return essentially to dignity. A lot of the campaign basically was that, for Siljanovska-Davkova, that in recent years, the country had been humiliated by the name change, that the concessions to Bulgaria were too much, and that, as their campaign slogan goes, that she would essentially make Macedonia proud again. A big issue that she's been campaigning on have been these constitutional amendments and sort of VMRO-DPMNE's opposition to them. The fact
What's
that
her stance on the constitutional changes?
Yeah, I mean, she is definitely, VMRO-DPMNE as a party is opposed to the constitutional amendments in their current format. The party, as well as others, have essentially argued that they want to either renegotiate portions of the framework with the European Union or take a different approach whereby essentially they're advocating that, sure, we will accept the changes to the constitution, but we will do that only when Macedonia is essentially actually formally joining the European Union and not now. And I think this is because a lot of the parties, but also the public, feels burned after the name change, in the sense of the country changed its name to North Macedonia, and the European Union, in fact, did not deliver on some of its promises. And so the parties are essentially advocating, we don't want that to happen again. And to avoid that, their solution is to do these changes sort of on the cusp of joining the Union.
Aleksej, is the reversal of the name change in discussion, or that's off the table?
I definitely think that's something that's off the table. VMRO-DPMNE as a party, which is the party that will more than likely come to power and win the most votes in the parliamentary election next week, they will use Macedonia rather than North Macedonia in their rhetoric. But at the end of the day, the formal documents on which they will all sign that they will be MPs or that they will be the president will have the word North Macedonia on it. I think that at this point, it's unlikely that they're going to, do anything in that front. Levica was the only party advocating annulling the Prespa agreement. So they will tacitly and quietly essentially accept the fact that the name change has happened, and that is history now.
If elected, Siljanovska-Davkova will be the first woman president of North Macedonia. And as you said, the opposition party and her view on the constitutional changes definitely clashes with the current government's stance on it. What do you think? What will be the potential implications if the constitutional changes will remain unaddressed?
I mean, this is more than likely to happen. It is unlikely that the present composition of VMRO-DPMNE will want to push these changes, even when they come to power. But as everything else in the politics of North Macedonia, anything can happen. Surprises are always a possibility. But if you take the first round of the presidential vote, and you look at the results, and you translate the results of the parties into mandates in parliament, VMRO-DPMNE would have about 53 MPs, Maxim Dimitrievski's ZNA movement would have about 10, and Levica would have about 4. That would bring them to about 67, 68 MPs, almost 70 MPs of parties that are all against the constitutional amendments. So that means that the other 50 MPs from the Albanian bloc and from the SDSM bloc would need to essentially somehow get 30 additional MPs on their side to make the changes happen, because you need a 2/3, 80 out of 120 MPs in the parliament. So that's very unlikely. But at the same time, this, in my view, shouldn't necessarily stop the EU process. At the end of the day, the EU process is about opening of the chapters and meeting the reforms that are necessary and abiding by the Copenhagen criteria. Any government, regardless of the name change in the past, regardless of the current situation with Bulgaria, has the authority to make all the reforms that are necessary and advance the country toward EU integration and the values and the standards of what that means, regardless of this, international agreement and what's taking place on the international stage.
We'll have to see what the new EU administration after the elections would say about this potential continuing the accession talks without the constitutional change. Again, about the presidential elections, given the surprise gap in the initial vote, what are Penderovski's chances of securing a second presidential mandate in the runoff, in your view, and how will he rally his base and appeal to undecided voters?
So before that, I think there's something that's really interesting about what happened in the first round. I think there's kind of three big surprises that will essentially impact how Pendarovski or Siljanovska will do. First, the opposition VLEN of the Albanian bloc, was really hoping for the first time to kind of outperform the ruling ethnic Albanian DUI party. And unfortunately, they were really not able to succeed. They, Bujar Osmani and the DUI still beat VLEN by about 37,000 votes. A lot of this due to the fact that they brought in some, other parties. They brought in parties representing the Roma, the Turkish, and the Bosniak communities that kind of, I think, helped them eke out that victory. So that battle is quite interesting. The other is Maxim Dimitrievski and this newly formed Znam movement. Polls had him somewhere between 4 and 7%. He outperformed and got over 9% of the vote, which really was not expected. And that's something that he, as a former social democrat that is kind of more of the conservative wing of that party, is clearly pulling voters from SDSM, which does not bode well for them in the next round. And the third thing that was interesting also from the first round was the fact that Biljana Vankovska-Cvetkovska from Levica kind of fell flat. There was a lot of discussion and speculation about the rise of Levica as this party, as, that they would get a lot more MPs, a lot more votes, but it seems they've kind of stabilized their base. And so now what that means...
What happened there? What impacted their performance, Levica?
I believe, and I've seen analysts kind of commenting on this, that essentially, they've basically stabilized the base of their vote. This is kind of where they are. In the 2020 parliamentary election, they had about 37,000 votes. In the local elections in 2021, they had about 50,000. And so they're somewhere in this range, and they've stabilized. I don't believe that she as a candidate is as popular as a lot of the other members of their party, and that might have resulted in them having a lower voter base. So they might do a little bit better in the parliamentary elections, but we'll have to see. Going back to the question about Pendarovski and how Pendarovski might perform, that's a big gap. 183,000 votes is a big gap to try to fill somehow. The Znam movement from Maxim Dimitrievski is open to having a coalition with VMRO-DPMNE. It's unlikely that their voters will back Pendarovski. More than likely, they will vote for Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova. Same with Levica. If Levica's voters decide to vote, they are very unlikely to pick Pendarovski. The debate right now is whether any of the Albanian candidates will back one or the other. There's still ongoing conversations about that. It's unclear if either of the Albanian parties will back one of the candidates, or if they'll just tell their voters, go ahead and vote as you please, or feel free to not vote, whatever is kind of in your interest. I think VLEN in particular is doing this because VMRO-DPMNE has been courting them clearly as a potential coalition partner in the next government. And I think that if they were to endorse Pendarovski, who has more of their similar pro-EU views, they might alienate VMRO-DPMNE and cause problems. So in that sense, I think the Albanian parties might kind of sit this one out and see what happens.
Very interesting. Things like the game is still on, and
Exactly.
plenty of surprises ahead. Foreign Minister Bujar Osmani from the co-ruling party Democratic Union for Integration finished third with 13.4% of the vote. Another surprise, I would say. What will the DYI support, or what will the DYI support Pendarovski in the second round?
Right now, the DUI, they will either support Pendarovski or they will have their voters sit it out. I mean, these are the two options. Still, Bujar Osmani got about 121,000 votes. That's definitely not 180,000 votes to get Pendarovski to at least hit what Siljanovska-Davkova had. I think there's internal discussions going on about this. There was a discussion at some point that maybe the DUI and SDSM would have joint lists or a joint presidential candidate. That clearly didn't pan out. And so, sure, maybe they might back Pendarovski. It's still unclear if that's something that would happen.
What's the holdup? Why there is no clear support for Pendarovski from DUI?
I think that the DUI also is attempting to position themselves as a potentially still being open to any kind of coalition. Despite the animosity with VMRO-DPMNE. But at the end of the day, I think right now they've really been going at each other, VMRO-DPMNE and the DUI. It's really unlikely to happen. And VMRO-DPMNE in particular is looking to put DUI in opposition for the first time in 20 years. And I don't think that they will budge on that. So, there's just an internal party discussion at the DUI happening. they will make a decision whether their voters can vote how they please or if they'll openly back Demjanski.
If I may ask you a little bit on the current government, the SDSM, the self-declared EU riders, what are the main themes, the main platforms that they are campaigning on, and how effectively are they addressing the concrete concerns that the voters have?
Yeah. So the campaign slogan for the Social Democrats this time is, don't give up on the future. They're continuing this battle that they are sort of the only pro-European choice among the electorate, that they are in favor of the constitutional amendments to include Bulgarians as a state-forming people in the constitution as part of the EU accession process. But at the same time, I think, in the past 30 years in society in North Macedonia, I think most voters have become sick of the two poles of options they have. On the one hand, VMRO-DPMNE and the Nationalists continue to beat their chest with nationalist slogans. On the other hand, you have SDSM beating their chests with EU slogans and phrases. None of these seem to be concretely addressing the concerns that citizens have, whether that's the healthcare system, whether that's brain drain of young people, whether that's sort of corruption, the judiciary, the economy. We've gotten into this discussion of, for the amendments, against the amendments, for the EU, against the EU, without really addressing citizens' concerns. This is, I think, where essentially SDSM in the past 7 years kind of dropped the ball, in essence. They didn't complete sort of the domestic tasks of reforming that they promised they would, and voters are disillusioned because of that. And they themselves have even, recently in September of last year, passed through changes to the criminal code that would reduce penalties for politicians and other officials that have committed high crimes. And so how does that, compare to we are pro-EU and in favor of EU values? Seems to be a bit of a disconnect there.
And same question for the VMRO-DPMNE, the proud nostalgics. How are their platforms resonating with the voters' concerns, if they are?
If we just take Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova's results, I think this surprised VMRO-DPMNE. I don't think that they themselves even expected to have this many votes for her and for their party in that first round of the presidential election, which means they're doing something right in the sense of they've been really hammering home this thing that I mentioned about dignity. They're really talking about the fact that they will, not allow, North Macedonia to continue to be humiliated going forward on the international stage. That's something that clearly resonates with a lot of folks. I mean, if you take a look at, for example, the PRESPA agreement and the referendum around that, you could see that there was a huge dissatisfaction among voters with that, and most people didn't turn out to vote. And so same with the constitutional amendments. Polling has been showing that, 70-80% of the public is against the constitutional amendments, and VMRO-DPMNE is offering an option that is against them as well. And so that clearly seems to be attracting people. Again, nationalism from VMRO-DPMNE and nationalism from the DUI, unfortunately, continues to bring a lot of votes.
Now that you're describing the opposition, a question popped out in my mind. Could Ms. Siljanovska-Davkova have personal votes that are, or can she as a candidate be bigger than VMRO-DPMNE?
Actually, yes. This is something that's, she technically collected the 10,000 votes to run as an independent candidate, but is also backed by VMRO-DPMNE. Incumbent President Stevo Pendarovski did the same. Siljanovska-Davkova as a candidate, even currently as a member of parliament, despite being backed and getting elected as a VMRO-DPMNE member, once entering parliament became an independent candidate in parliament and sort of charted her own way. There's been times when she's opposed both the SDSM, but also she's opposed people of her own party on certain issues. So she definitely is looking to sort of chart her own way. What's important to remember, in North Macedonia's parliamentary system, the president is largely a ceremonial role. They don't have too much sort of leeway on a lot of policies other than maybe, the diplomatic corps, the armed forces, and things like that. The role of the president really is to build consensus among political parties and stakeholders in civil society on certain issues, be a uniting force. And part of her campaign is that that's what she also aims to do. And again, based on the 360,000 votes she got, that seems to be resonating with people.
And last question, I know it's not the most easiest one, despite what we discussed now. Looking ahead, what are the most possible post-election coalition? Will we have an alliance between VMRO-DPMNE, ZNAM, and VLEN, or SDSM and DYI?
So right now, if we took again that first round of the presidential vote and the results from that, SDSM would have somewhere around 25 MPs. The DUI would have somewhere about 17. That's only, about 42 MPs. That's not enough to form government. So the current coalition that's in power would be unable to form government based on that. I think VMRO-DPMNE is looking to they will probably have 53 MPs. VLEN will have somewhere about 12. That's enough to form a coalition, more than 60. But they're also looking to include ZNAM in there and kind of fortify a coalition that's a bit bigger. VLEN has been saying, we're waiting for the results on May 8th next week, and then we'll make a decision. But they're clearly open to a coalition with VMRO-DPMNE. Maxim Dimitrievski and the ZNAM movement, also are. Technically, if Maxim Dimitrievski and his movement get 10 MPs and VMRO has 53, that's 63. That's just as strong as the current government sort of majority right now. And so I think this is the most likely coalition that we will see. It's very unlikely that SDSM and the DUI will be able to form a coalition, and a bit tough for VLEN to say, okay, we as pro-Europeans together with DUI and SDSM will come together and potentially form government, considering they're so, the battle between the DUI and VLEN is quite strong. So again, VMRO with VLEN, with ZNAM is the most likely option going forward.
Aleksej, thank you very much. You definitely help our viewers understand a little bit more why these elections in North Macedonia are important, and they definitely are. Thank you very much for talking to Balkans Debrief.
Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you.